All right, everybody, welcome to another lecture on our topic of globalization. And today we're going to focus in on dance, particularly salsa dancing, as a kind of case study for thinking about the ways in which dance is entangled in these kind of global flows of movement, ideas, and culture, and especially music. So, dance has played a pretty central role in Latin American nationalism for at least 100 years. But in recent years, it has also come to play a role in establishing pan Latino identifications and bringing Latino pop culture to even broader audiences. Salsa, for instance, began as a kind of symbol of New York Puerto Rican pride or Nuyorican pride, and later became an emblem of Pan-Latinism and is today a globalized form of pop culture. So to kind of start off our lecture today, I want to just give a little bit of a historical kind of background for salsa music, and then we'll talk more about how salsa as a dance form evolved. So the music we know today as salsa emerged in New York City in the 1960s. It was a combination of Cuban's music like son, guaracha, guiera, with a little bit of flavor from Puerto Rican plena and música ibarra, and a little touch of Latin jazz as well. Salsa music depended on networks and tastes already set up by previous Latin music crazes in New York, particularly in the 1950s, music crazes like the mambo. Fania Records was the driving commercial force behind salsa music, popularizing the term salsa and making sure virtually all the artists playing this style were part of the Fania All-Star Ensemble, depicted behind me here. So there's kind of a debate here between Cuban and Puerto Rican origins of salsa music because it takes a lot from all of these different styles. Salsa music, however, sounds far different from both its Cuban predecessors and current Cuban styles such as songo and timba. Salsa differs from its close relative, the Cuban son, in its emphasis on brass instruments, the addition of timbales, and a more kind of violent arrangement, as well as an influence of jazz harmonies. Early salsa artists came from a variety of backgrounds, but New York-born Puerto Ricans were the most numerous and among the most influential of this crop of Latin musicians. It's thus become an important symbol of Nuyorican identity and culture. So one of the things I want us to think about here in using salsa as a case study are examples of how music and identity become linked as music styles begin to expand and take different kinds of influences from different types of culture and musical styles. So in class, we'll talk about this with your peers, some of the links between music and identity. Just as salsa music functions on many different levels to serve different identities, so does dancing. Salsa dancing continued to grow and change in New York City as salsa music began to emerge and become more commercialized. The result was a split between those who danced salsa for fun and to socialize, and those who had goals of kind of performing and competing in salsa dance. Street dancers may or may not feel connected to a global community of salsa dancers, but studio dancers certainly do. They are connected to one another virtually through dance websites, discussion groups, and online social networking. And they're also connected to each other in person through competitions that take place throughout the year. Salsa culture is an urban culture that has been transnational since its inception. Salsa dancing typically kind of originated, or we understand it to have originated, through this kind of intermixing of Cuban and Puerto Ricans in urban spaces like New York. But it also is influenced by other groups living in these urban spaces like African Americans, Italian Americans, and other Hispanic or Latin American groups, Mexicans, Colombians, Dominicans, West Africans, and many others. Just before the emergence of salsa dancing, Latin American pop culture was being disseminated throughout the Americas through Cuban recordings and Mexican films. These records often made its way from Cuba and Mexico to West Africa, where it contributed to an array of local popular musics, including Congolese rumba, Nigerian highlife, Angolan kizomba, and Guyanan maringa. These styles themselves rest on earlier layers of African Caribbean genres like gumbe, once found in Jamaica, Louisiana, Cuba, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and beyond. Transnational connections and interchange are thus nothing new in the kind of Caribbean, pan-Latin music and dance scene. Such processes have been described by Cuban scholar Fernando Ortiz as transculturation. Ortiz sees transculturation as being particularly typical of the Caribbean because of the diversity of cultures involved and the prolonged intensity of their interactions, which made the region really distinct from Europe. Today, however, such intensive interactions of multiple cultures have spread to many, if not most, urban areas around the world. Transculturation, like salsa, is thus a part of a kind of globalizing world, but is also a part that is rooted in a particular Caribbean past and a particular Caribbean past of intermixing between different ethnic groups. Salsa is different from earlier transcultural kind of Caribbean dances in the degree of its commercialization, however. As long as the genre label has existed, it has always been made to be marketed. It is also different from earlier types of kind of globalized Caribbean music and dance in that it was never a rural music or a purely oral tradition. In addition, it inhabits a special position as a dance that exists in both a professional, globally marketed, performance-oriented form, that of studio salsa, and as an amateur, local, social form in the form of street salsa. As salsa dance became commercialized and professionalized, the dance was also standardized so that a few basic steps are taught in a couple different but easily recognizable forms around the world. Salsa dancers around the world categorize these styles in two principal ways, either by nationality or region or by musical relationship. So in terms of kind of national region, there's this idea of Cuban, U.S. West Coast, U.S. or West Coast style, and then Colombian style. In terms of musical relationships, people in the salsa scene categorize things as on one or on two, which is referring to the count on which the dancer breaks or changes directions in their steps. In places without a prior tradition of Cuban son or mambo dancing, introductory classes given at nightclubs before salsa band performances are one important way that has spread this style. Students interested in acquiring dance competence allowed specialists to emerge and impelled them to create these more complicated styles with a plethora of new steps and turn patterns. More complicated styles in turn helped establish a dedicated community of salsa dancers, willing to invest time and money in lessons, videos, shoes, and clothing. Promoters then created what we call congresses, which made money while also enlarging and intensifying dance networks. Commodified salsa dancing reinforced a specific set of steps rather than a social practice. And it spread even to those locations where a strong tradition of social salsa dancing already existed. So as part of this kind of spread and professionalization of salsa dancing, we see these two types of main venues emerge. Socials, which are these kind of informal parties for serious dancers that are inspired by ballroom studio practices, and congresses, which are these larger conventions often featuring theatrical performances, and competitive events. Over the past decade or 20 years or so, really, the number of congresses, these kind of transnational dance uh, settings, has increased dramatically. So I thought it'd be fun if I played a video of a bit of a performance from one of these dance congresses, just so you guys can get a sense of the flavor here.
Con Chile y Argentina. Que se escuche el aplauso para la pareja 285, Karen y Ricardo. Con Argentina and Chile, number 285, Karen and Ricardo. Y estamos en competencia.
Anyways, if you want to watch more of them, obviously you can YouTube it. You were just looking at the world champion, the last world champions of salsa, and you can tell how much different, right, this kind of professionalization of salsa dancing is from what we would see kind of in a nightclub or at a kind of more informal social setting. So there's an important link here in terms of thinking about globalization and salsa, in terms of the role of mass communication technologies, which have been really important in establishing salsa as a kind of globalized form of pop culture. The internet, obviously, has facilitated not only the spread of certain steps and styles within the salsa genre, but also a dialogue between distant dancers. For instance, while Colombia and Japan are culturally and geographically really different, they share the practice of relating to salsa primarily through social media. Recordings and films have been a really important way in which people in Colombia have kind of interacted with salsa culture, whereas the internet and print media have played an important role in disseminating the genre in Japan. In Spain, on the contrary, radio through music, salsa music, has been the principal means through which the salsa community has been built. In the Dominican Republic, salsa has also played an important kind of cultural role in tourism and local cultural industries in a way that the dance has really created connections between people and places that's different from what we see in Colombia, in Spain, and in Japan. So salsa is also different in terms of the audiences it reaches, which now include all classes of people because of its geographic spread and influence. When we look particularly at studio salsa, we find that in most countries it is the practice of a select group that might be termed cosmopolitan. Salsa scenes are frequently cosmopolitan in several kind of key ways. So, in most places, salsa dancing is not firmly tied to a concept of nation, so that most salseros do not choose the dance for nationalist reasons. So, this is one of the ways in which it becomes cosmopolitan because it transcends these ideas of nationality and instead relates to a generalized concept of Latinidad or a sense of Latino identity and to specific notions of locality, local pride, and localized concepts of Latino identity. Most importantly, many salsa dancers feel connected to other salseros in disparate locations throughout the world through their dance practice. Particularly in places far from cultural centers, people may get involved in salsa precisely because it offers them a way of making a connection with people who are different from them. Terms like globalization and transnationalism express this kind of common feeling that life today is qualitatively different from life in previous centuries, despite the fact that, as we talked about in our first lecture for this module, that we have lots of evidence of kind of interconnectedness, mixtures, fusion, and travel in the ancient world. What is new about today is not interconnectedness, but rather three key things. First, the degree of complexity in social connectivity that we often take for granted today is really different. Two, the transformation of our experience of space and time through mass media and the ease of travel has really differed from the past. And three, there's a widespread use of communication technology in all aspects of daily life. And this creates a kind of changing relationship between place and culture that has really resulted in a breakdown of national boundaries in an unprecedented way. Globalized salsa thus means complex connections between different and distant groups of dancers, facilitated by technologies like the internet, a sense of proximity to dancers halfway around the world, and a clear sense of locality through local dance styles. It also means increasing links to global institutions through the music and dance industries that form a part of the global capitalist system. So here's another point where I want to pause and ask the class to think about some other examples that they might have of globalized dance forms and what the kind of cultural roots and influences of those dance forms might be. So take a moment and jot down some notes. This would also be a really great topic for your fourth commentary if this is something that interests you. So by calling salsa globalized, I'm pointing to the fact that salsa has spread to many continents, countries, localities, and communities, many of which have little in common except their interest in salsa. But far from producing a kind of single homogeneous movement style, salsa has developed differently in different locations. It has also taken on different gendered and racialized meanings as it has become embedded in local hierarchies, ethnic identities, and histories of relationships. Salsa dancing today is clearly a commodity being sold through dance lessons, videos, recording, and attire. While music is easily transportable through recordings, meaning that people anywhere can reproduce it with a kind of exactitude and hear exactly the same song, the dance experience is less replicable. Even though one can learn dance steps from videos, a practice that has been made a lot easier with things like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, most people still learn to dance face to face through body to body transmission, if we want to think about it that way. In addition, while today music listening is often conducted in private, dance is a social activity. For these reasons, dance is supremely susceptible to localization processes as well as globalization processes. So when one learns any dance, prior bodily dispositions enter into a performance of that dance, whether intentionally or not. This reliance on muscle memory means that when a new community adopts a dance, the prior movement experiences of the members may enter in and become part of that dance. What all of this means for salsa is that although a commercialized transnational product, although it is this kind of transnational product, it's also something that many people in different locations experience as their own. So we can think about the kind of localizing aspect of salsa in terms of what we might call dance accents. So this is an idea that refers to how these kind of small cues in bodily movement and posture and timing distinguish different dance styles. So for example, New Yorkers, Los Angelinos, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Colombians, Dominicans, and other groups all have their own unique ways of dancing salsa that distinguish them as much as, for example, their spoken accents do. Those kind of small cues of bodily movement and posture make up a pretty significant, make up noticeable, tangible differences that make salsa local, as opposed to only global. Localized salsas have complex relationships with notions of authenticity. For instance, Mexican salsa dancers in Los Angeles are sometimes grouped with other Latinos as authentic, and at other times deemed inauthentic because they are not Caribbean. A similar dynamic occurs in Illinois, where Mexicans are considered native to salsa because of their Latin American origins, even though they are also viewed with kind of suspicion within the dance scene. So while salsa provides kind of a Midwestern small town cosmopolitans with a way of connecting to global pop culture and to meet others of a different background, it also camouflages a really particular form of racism manifested in the kind of local scorn for Mexican dance styles. The version of salsa taught in ballroom studios and tied to dance as a sport, like we talked about earlier, with formally kind of regulated competition, seems to be pretty divorced from these kind of race and place-based notions of authenticity. While all dance scenes are local, not all dance scenes and not all places produce the conditions for the development of place-specific styles. Anthropologist Sydney Hutchinson has proposed the concept of kinetopia as a way to understand how people dance in specific places and why place-specific styles develop. This term, kinetopia, literally means place of movement and refers to a kind of important relationship between movement and place in two different ways. So some dances are kinetopias in that their relationship to place defines them, whereas other dances are kinetopic in that these dances are defined by their particular patterns of movement rather than their places of origins. People define kinetopias through contact and comparison. We move in this way and they do not. And thus, they also create these sites for identity construction around particular places and particular ways of moving. So to give a kind of example here, a more grounded example. So in New York, the on-two style, right? Remember, that's when you shift movement. The on-two style is more common and has become a localized or kinetopic variant of salsa, whereas in Los Angeles, the on-one style has dominated the salsa scene. The so-called Cuban style is also danced in many locations and presents an important alternative to these on one or on two styles, and is an example of this more kind of the importance of movement rather than place in making salsa kind of local. This Cuban style builds on a distinctive circle dance called casino or rueda de casino, which developed in social clubs in Cuba during the 1950s and then resurged during the 1980s. This dance form, rueda, derives from Cuban casino music, a round dance in which multiple couples exchange partners and perform these kind of coordinated moves according to a leader's call. The music for this dance form is also a little more jazzy, a little more funk influence in terms of its arrangements and combinations than other types of salsa. Here's another quick clip of Casino, Rueda de Casino, that's being performed as a street dance in Santiago. So while the music associated with salsa is rooted in a particular place, for example, in New York City, in the areas that were heavily populated by Puerto Rican and Cuban dancers, the dance form has spread across the globe and created these new kinetopias that have linked salsa to place and particular types of movements. Place-specific kinetopic salsa styles tend to emerge in locations that already have a distinct local or regional culture with a strong heritage of partner dance. And cultural connection to the dance, either through geography or migration, creates these kind of network sites for dancing. Media outlets have really supported the genre and led to a large number of local salsa aficionados. Only such places seem to have the numbers, momentum, and dance vocabulary needed to create and sustain these kinetopias of salsa dancing. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the lecture and that your interest is piqued to learn more about salsa. The D2L quiz answer for today is Chaco Canyon is pink. So make sure to fill out your quiz.